So now today we're going to start with a new chapter that is nothing but the second chapter in genetics, as I told you, molecular basis of inheritance. So when I say molecular basis of inheritance, okay, I told you all that we are going to look at this level will be in the molecular range. Okay, for example, we know what is a DNA, we know what is transcription, we know what is translation, but here we are going to visualize how they are exactly happening in the molecular level. Okay, so to start with, we're going to see with the structure of the DNA. So you all know that DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, correct? So DNA was discovered, the exact structure of the DNA was given by what scientists called Watson and Crick. Okay, these are the scientists who were able to predict the 3D structure of the DNA exactly. Okay, now the DNA will have the parts of the DNA will include three main entities. Okay, one is your nitrogenous base. Okay, and then you'll have a phosphate group, and the last one will be your sugar. So my DNA will have three main parts, that is nothing but a nitrogenous base, a phosphate group, and a sugar. So nitrogenous bases can be of two types, that is nothing but your purines and pyrimidines. So nitrogenous bases are of two types, purines and pyrimidines. Okay, fine. So now purines are, the examples for purines are adenine and guanine. And examples for pyrimidines are cytosine and thymine and uracil in the case of RNA. So these are the main nitrogenous bases. Purines are adenine and guanine. Pyrimidines are cytosine, thymine and uracil. Okay. Now, purines and pyrimidines, they will help in making up the structure of the DNA. How is that possible? Also, one more important thing is purines are double ringed. Okay, and pyrimidines are single ringed. So what do I mean by double ring and single ring is that in their structure, okay, so purines will be somewhere like this. So these are purine structures, whereas pyrimidines will be single ringed. Okay, now purines always pairs with pyrimidines. Okay, so purines always, that is adenine will pair with thymine, guanine will pair with cytosine. So purines will always pair with pyrimidines. Okay, so purines will always pair with pyrimidines. Okay, so now here adenine will pair with thymine, guanine will pair with cytosine. So the adenine and thymine bond will be a double bond, guanine and cytosine bond will be a triple bond. So this is how the pairing happens. Okay, adenine pairs with thymine, guanine pairs with cytosine. Okay, now after all these things, okay, so one more, also the phosphate. So phosphate forms the backbone of your DNA structure. Okay, and sugar, just because this is DNA, the sugar present here is deoxyribonucleic acid, whereas deoxyribose. Okay, whereas in RNA the sugar is ribose, so here it is deoxyribose. Okay, now with that things in mind, I'm just going to show you how the bondings are going to happen. Okay, imagine adenine. Okay, so adenine will initially pair with, okay, so adenine will initially pair with your sugar, that is nothing but your ribose sugar, and this forms your any nitrogenous base. I'm just telling an example is adenine, but any nitrogenous base pairs with the sugar and forms nucleoside. Okay, now this nucleoside pairs with what is left over, phosphate, right? So phosphate and forms nucleotide. Okay, and then lot of nucleotides together, so many nucleotides together join together to form the DNA, which is nothing but the polynucleotides. So many nucleotides, right? So n number of nucleotides. So many nucleotides. So I call DNA as a polynucleotide structure. I repeat, nitrogenous base initially bonds with your sugar to form nucleoside. Nucleoside pairs with your phosphate to form nucleotide. Many nucleotides join together to form the DNA or a polynucleotide. Okay, now, alright. So what is a bond in between these structures is what we're going to see now. Nitrogenous base and sugar, the bond between these two is called as glycosidic linkage. So the bond between, I'll call it as the bond between your nitrogenous base and sugar is called N-glycosidic linkage. Okay. The bond between nucleoside and phosphate is that phosphoester bond. These are the bonds. The ones in the boxes are the bonds and linkages. So the bond between a nucleoside and a phosphate is nothing but the phosphoester bond. And the bond between nucleotide and nucleotide is phosphodiester bond. This is phosphodiester bond. So that is glycosidic linkage, phosphoester, and this is phosphodiester bond. Okay. So if I have to break my DNA into small pieces, what bonds I'll break is I'll break this phosphodiester bond. Okay, because if the DNA has to be broken into pieces means it has to be broken into nucleotides. So what bonds I'll break? Obviously phosphodiester bonds. And the bonds between the nitrogenous bases, that is A, T, G, C, the double bonds here and triple bond here is nothing but the hydrogen bonds. The bonds here are hydrogen bonds. So we've learned about 4 types of bonds: N-glycosidic linkage, phosphoester bond, phosphodiester bond, and then hydrogen bond. So these are the 4 types of bonds present in the DNA. Okay. Now, how is the structure of the DNA arranged? So let me just imagine this is your adenine. Okay. So adenine first bonds with your sugar, and this in turn bonds with your phosphate, correct? So this is one nucleotide. Now adenine on other hand, this is one strand. Here it will be guanine. Guanine has again sugar, again phosphate. So every nucleotide will have a sugar and a phosphate. So likewise, one strand goes on. Then is thymine, sugar and then phosphate. So this will be one strand. So whatever is there here, complementary to this, I will have, if I have A, I'll have thymine. If I have, sorry, there is only double bond between adenine and thymine. And if I have G here, I'll have C here. And thymine, I'll have A. So whatever nitrogenous bases are here in this strand, accordingly complementary nitrogenous bases will come up in this strand. Okay. And this has got sugar and that in turn has got phosphate. Here sugar and then phosphate. So this is how the double-stranded structure is formed. So in double-stranded structure, the 2 strands are held together by nitrogenous bases. Okay. One strand and other strand. The strands are joined together in the center by my nitrogenous bases. And sugar and phosphate forms the backbone of the DNA structure. These bonds are hydrogen bonds. Okay. Now, if I have to split my DNA into 2 strands, I don't want to cut my DNA. I want to denature. Okay. I want to separate the strands means what bonds I'll break is I'll break the hydrogen bonds. If I have to cut my DNA, I'll break the phosphodiester bonds. If I have to split my DNA, I'll break my hydrogen bonds. So this is all about the structure. And also you know that DNA has 2 strands anti-parallel. One will be in one direction, the other one will be in the opposite direction. So the 2 strands will be anti-parallel in the orientation. And then what in DNA, the most important thing in DNA is the stability. Two strands will ensure the stability. See, even RNA is a genetic material. Okay, but why RNA? But why we call DNA as a universal genetic material? Because of its stability. So DNA is comparatively more stable than the RNA. Okay, and the next one, which about the DNA is, for each strand, okay, the distance between the nitrogenous bases is always a constant. Okay, distance between nitrogenous bases is always a constant. Okay. So as we were seeing the structure of the DNA, I was talking to you about the distance between the nitrogenous bases. Okay, so the distance between nitrogenous base is always a constant, that is about 3.4 nanometer. Okay, so this is a constant value. So if you see the DNA like this, okay, say A, T, G, C, A. Okay, so okay, so again A, A, T, A, G. So likewise, parallelly, if A is there, I'll have T here. T is there, A. So like this, the bases will go on. Okay. So if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there are totally 10 nitrogenous bases from here to here. So from this, I can calculate the length of the DNA. The length of the DNA is equal to number of bases into the distance between the bases, which is a constant, this value. So if I have 10, so 10 into 3.4 nanometer will give the length of my DNA. Okay, so the length of my DNA will be 34 nanometer here. Okay, so likewise you can calculate the length of the, at times they might give you the length and they might ask you to find out how many nitrogenous bases are present. So accordingly you might have some problems, but you have to remember that the distance between the nitrogenous bases is always a constant, that is nothing but a 3.4 nanometer. Okay, fine. Now we are going to see about the packaging of DNA. How is the DNA packed inside the cell? Where can you find the DNA as soon as you open this, as soon as you break your cell? Where can you find the DNA? Where is it exactly located? Okay, so that things we're going to see now. So first thing is that you all know that in a cell you'll have a nucleus. So in the nucleus the DNA is present. That is in the chromosome they are present. So how are they packed? How is it packed in the chromosome? So all these we're going to see now. Okay. So first of all, DNA is a negatively charged protein. The charge of the DNA is negatively charged. Okay. Now what happens here is a positive protein called as histone protein is present. Okay. So there is a positive round ball-like protein called as histone proteins. So this histone is not a single protein. It is a combination of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is a octamer. I will call this as a octamer protein. Okay, because this is made up of combination of 8 subunits. So H1, H2, H2A something. So totally there are 8 subunits. So that is why I call it as histone octamer. Okay. So why is this histone having positive charges? Because histone is mainly made up of 2 important amino acids, that is nothing but your lysine and arginine. So lysine and arginine are the amino acids which are giving your positive charge to the histone protein. Okay. So these 2 amino acids are present in the histone protein. Okay. Now this is a ball, correct? So on this is a positive protein because of these 2. So what happens is the negatively charged DNA is wrapped around this positively charged protein. Because negative, to attract the negative charge, there should be a positive charge. So my negatively charged DNA is wrapped around the positively charged protein. And this structure, wherein a positive protein with a negatively charged DNA is called as nucleosome. So this is called as nucleosome. So now a lot of nucleosomes are linked together like this. Okay, this is one nucleosome. So likewise, multiple nucleosomes are linked together. And this forms your, this appears like a beads of your string. Okay, so this structure of multiple nucleosomes are called as chromatids. It's called as chromatid. So multiple nucleosomes are called as chromatids. So this chromatid structure is what happens here is on the chromosome, this chromatid structure is wound like this. The beads will be like this. Clear? So this is how the DNA is packed. So I repeat again, So there is a positive proton called as histone proton, or with that positivity is because of the presence of lysine and arginine. On this, the negatively charged DNA is first wound around the positively charged proton, and this structure of one ball with the DNA surrounding it is called nucleosome. Lot of nucleosomes together are linked together, and that forms your chromatid structure. This chromatid, this bead of strings, okay, the chromatid is wound on the chromosomal arm like that. So this is how my DNA. So if I have to get the DNA from this chromosome, I have to first pull out the chromatids. From the chromatids, I have to pull out the nucleosomes. From the nucleosome, I can pull out the DNA. Okay, so this is how the DNA is arranged. Okay, now this wrapping, okay, the chromatid, the wrapping of chromatid on the chromosomal arm can be of two types. One is this is normally wrapped. Certain cases it will be very tightly wrapped. It will be densely packed. There will not be any space seen. Okay. So when it is loosely packed, I call this structure as euchromatin. And when it is densely packed, I call it as heterochromatin. So there are two types of wounding. Based upon the wounding, it can be two types. One is loosely wound, and the other one is very tightly wound. Okay. The one which is normally wound is called as euchromatin, and the one which is tightly wrapped on the chromosomal arm is called as heterochromatin. So if you see these two chromosomes, which one do you think is active? Which one do you think can function effectively? This can only function effectively, and this is condensed, so this is not functional. This is not active. So yesterday we have seen something called bar body. You remember it is condensed and heterochromatinized. So similar structure is this. So when the chromosome is condensed, it cannot be transcriptionally active. So this structure is not active. Heterochromatins are not transcriptionally active, whereas euchromatins are transcriptionally active. So this is all about the packaging of your DNA. Okay. So next is we're going to see about some experiments. Okay. So we were seeing about the structure of the DNA. How is it all aligned? What is the formula to calculate the length of the DNA, all these things. So now we're going to see, we have DNA, RNA and protein, correct? So in spite of that, we still call DNA as genetic material, okay? Why not RNA cannot be called as genetic material? Why not protein? How is this DNA winning the race? See, if you see this RNA, this is present in most of the lower organisms, correct? So for viruses, and this is more effective also because RNA has a superpower called as reverse transcriptase. Okay, so RNA with the help of reverse transcriptase can synthesize its own DNA also. But in spite of that, why are we crowning DNA as a genetic material? The reason being, there are some factors which is to be considered if you have to say that as a genetic material. Okay, one is inheritance. Okay, any any genetic material should be inherited from one generation to other generation. That is your DNA, RNA, protein, or if you see that DNA can be inherited, RNA can be inherited, but protein cannot be inherited. Okay, so that is failing the race there. Okay, so any genetic material, when will I call it a genetic material? It should be passed on from one generation to other generation. Then only it can be called as a genetic material. Okay, fine. Next is that stability. It should not keep changing the forms. Okay, it should not undergo mutations often. It should be very, very, very stable. Okay, so stability, considering the stability factor, protein is more stable, next is the DNA, and last is the RNA. Why is RNA least stable? Is that RNA is only single stranded. Okay, so it is the bonds are still open, so whenever any other molecule is coming, it is highly reactive and it changes the forms. Whereas DNA, just because it has got double strands, the bonds are closed. So comparatively DNA is more stable, and protein is the most stable entity. Okay, so inheritance, stability, then it should form the Mendelian laws, Mendelian pattern of inheritance. So it should follow the Mendelian pattern of inheritance. So what follows mainly is your DNA. So considering all these factors, if you see, for inheritance, DNA plays a role. Stability, DNA has a better hand compared to those two. Mendelian laws. So that is why DNA has been awarded as a genetic material. Okay. So there were a set of experiments, say some 4 to 5 experiments, which shows which actually led to the conclusion that the DNA is a genetic material. Okay. Next, followed by that, we are going to see about some processes here. So this is very important in this chapter. So first is that when I get DNA, from the DNA, I'll get an mRNA, that is messenger RNA. From messenger RNA, what I get is a desired protein. Okay. The process of formation of mRNA from the DNA is called as transcription. Okay, and the process of formation of mRNA from the protein is called protein from the mRNA is called as translation. Okay, so this together is called as protein synthesis. Altogether, it is called as protein synthesis. So if I get a DNA from the DNA, then I call this process as replication. If I get a DNA from the DNA, it is called as DNA replication. So these are all, so we are going to see these processes in the molecular level now. Okay. First, coming to your replication. So you all know that my DNA is a double-stranded structure. So for the replication to take place, okay, so I should have a few important factors. First thing is that I should ORI stands for origin of replication. It is a site. Okay, it is a site. So what happens is, if this is a DNA, the DNA should have a ORI site. Only if the ORI site is there, replication will happen. So without this ORI site, replication will not happen. Okay. So what happens in the first step of replication is that, so this is your double-stranded structure, right? So what happens is, the bonds between the nitrogenous bases are broken, okay, and the two DNAs will open up like this. Okay, so the bonds are broken, that is, you'll have hydrogen bonds in between. So the bonds are broken and the DNA is opening up like this to form a, this is called as replication fork. So the DNA forms replication fork. So it's more like a fork kind of structure. So this is called as replication fork. Okay. Next, what happens is that after the formation of replication fork, okay, there are few set of enzymes which acts in this mechanism. The enzyme which breaks this this hydrogen bonds and which opens the DNA is called as, that enzyme is called as helicase. So helicase is the enzyme which breaks your hydrogen bonds between the nitrogenous bases and which will open up your DNA strands. Okay. So when you open up two strands which are bound together, when you open this, what happens in the upper portion is there will be a supercoil. Okay. So if this, normally it is like this. Okay. So when you open this further like this, so what happens? The supercoils. So you need an enzyme to remove the supercoils. That enzyme to remove your supercoils is called as topoisomerase. So topoisomerase is the enzyme which removes your supercoils, and helicase is the enzyme which breaks your hydrogen bonds. Okay, so now to start this process, okay, I'm just drawing the diagram again because the space won't be enough, so I'm just redrawing the diagram. Okay, so now, so these are the two strands which are open. Okay, so you know that there will be two orientation. One is 3' to 5', the other one is 5' to 3'. Correct? So when you open, the strands are also separated. Okay. Now what happens in DNA is that, see, anything, if I have to, what I have to synthesize here is other DNA. Okay. So for synthesizing anything, what I need is called as polymerase. If I have to synthesize RNA, I need RNA polymerase. Here I have to synthesize DNA, I need DNA polymerase. Okay. So DNA polymerase produces DNA. RNA polymerase produces other copy of RNA. Alright. Now, the problem with the polymerase is that it cannot start the process from nowhere. Okay. So from here, without any starting, it has got a starting problem. Okay. So what happens is, you need something else to start the process, and once it is started, DNA polymerase will continue the activity. Okay. So that's something. So imagine I have ATGC, AATC like this. Okay. So that's something which is going to start my process is called as primer. That's which is starting my process is called as primer, and here it is RNA primer. Why? Because primers are single stranded. So what happens is, this is a primer. If it is A, T, A, G, so this is your primer. And here also whatever strands are there here, complementary to that there will be some strands primers. Okay, so this primers, these are RNA primers. These are RNA primers. So once primers come, primers will always come and attach to your 3' ends. Okay, so it will start the process from the 3' ends. So once primers gets attached, the polymerase will continue the synthesis in this direction. Clear? So polymerase cannot start the process on its own, so it needs something else which has already started the process. So that's something which is there to start your process is the RNA primer. And then DNA polymerase will continue the activity like this in this direction. Okay. Now, if you see the DNA polymerase property, it can synthesize the DNA only in one direction. That is from, so if this is 3, this will be 5 and this will be 3, correct? So DNA polymerase synthesizes in 5' to 3' orientation. Okay, so DNA polymerase will synthesize the DNA in 5' to 3' orientation. And so it's more, and here also the same, 3' means here it's 5' and here it's 3'. But here it's more, see, if you ask me to walk from here to there, I'll walk spontaneously. From there, if you ask me to come back, okay, or else if you turn me like this and ask me to walk in the same direction, for me it's difficult, correct? The same process. So this is a reverse direction. So what happens is, this cannot synthesize continuously, but this synthesizes in a strands or a fragments called as, these fragments are called as Okazaki fragments. Okay, so this is named after a scientist called Okazaki. Okay, so the orientation from 5' to 3' will be continuous, but the reverse strand, this will be discontinuous. Okay, the strand which produces continuous, the strand which is producing a continuous strand is called as leading strand. This is your leading strand. And the one which is got with the fragments is called as lagging strand. The continuous strand is leading strand. The ones with Okazaki fragments is a lagging strand. Okay. Now, after that, the fragments, it is all joined together by the enzyme called as DNA ligase. So, you know, you've learned in biotechnology that ligase is helpful in joining, correct? So, to join these fragments, the enzyme which is used is your DNA ligase. So, if you see technically, helicase is an enzyme which separates the strands, topoisomerase removes supercoiled, primer starts the process, polymerase continues the process, and DNA ligase will seal the fragment. So, these are all the enzymes involved in your DNA replication. And apart from all these, without ORI, the entire process will not happen. This site is broken, replication will not happen. Okay, so origin of replication is very, very, very important for the replication process to happen. Okay, so this is how the DNA replication takes place. Okay, so a leading strand, so if you see the DNA polymerase activity, it is from 5' to 3'. Then this strand is called as template strand. Template is the model or a sample from which the new strand is produced. So this is my template and this is my newly synthesized strand. Okay. Now, if you see this process of DNA replication, I call this process of DNA replication as semi-conservative. So why do I call it a semi-conservative is because, okay, if you see the DNA, okay, so this is a mother strand, this is a new daughter. This is a mother strand, this is a new daughter. Okay, now this is a new one, this is a new one. Okay, so from one strand, if I have two strands like this, it is producing this one and this one. So in this, one strand is parental, the other strand is newly synthesized one, correct? So this is not completely new. So always this, so see what is said here is, this strand, the DNA strand is always conserved. Okay, see, for human beings, if we are replicating, mothers will give birth to children. Okay, the part of the mother will not be a child. Okay, mothers will give rise to children. But here, this DNA itself, the part of the DNA itself is becoming the children. That itself is going to the next generation. So DNA is conserved. That is why we say DNA is immortal. There is no death for the DNA because it keeps moving from one generation to other. So even after 1,000 generations, if you see, you can always find this DNA. This DNA is never lost. It is only transformed to the next generation. So this type of replication is only called semi-conservative mode of replication. So the DNA is immortal because of the semi-conservative mode of replication. Till now we have seen about the DNA replication, how is the process happening, what are all the enzymes involved. Next, what are we going to see is about transcription. DNA transcription. Okay, so this is, you have to visualize the process and understand things. It's a little complicated, but if you understand, it's very easy. Okay, so as you all know, what is transcription? From the DNA, if I get my mRNA, this is called as transcription. Okay, first of all, DNA is a double-stranded structure, and RNA is a single-stranded structure. How will the transcription happen? Will both strands be transcribed as two different RNAs, or will any one of these strands be transcribed as that? Only one strand of the DNA is transcribed, not two strands, only one strand is transcribed. Okay, the strand which is undergoing this transcription is called as template strand. Okay, so for example, so because when two strands are getting transcribed, okay, for example, when both the strands are getting transcribed, what happens is they will be complementary to each other. The mRNAs which are formed are complementary. So they'll bind to each other and they'll be transcription active. Clear? If the two strands of the same DNA are transcribed, the RNAs are complementary to each other and they'll bind to the same RNA, I mean the complementary RNAs, and they'll be inactivated. So that is why only one strand is transcribed, not two strands are not transcribed. Okay. Next one is that we're going to see about the process of transcription. Okay. So till now I told you only one strand is transcribed, two strands are not transcribed. Okay, now let's draw the DNA. This is 3' to 5', 5' to 3'. Okay, so A, G, C, A, C, C, G, T, T, A, G. Okay, so this is one strand. The complementary strand would be, if I have A, I'll have T. If I have G, I'll have C. G, T, G, G, C, A, T, G. So this will be the complementary strand. So if I have A, I'll have T. If I have G, I'll have C. So this is how the two strands are. Okay. Now imagine this is a gene, okay, which codes for insulin protein. Clear? AGCACC, this is a gene which codes for insulin protein. So if I have the requirement of production of insulin in my body, this strand will be transcribed. Clear? I repeat, this is one gene which codes for a protein. So when I have the requirement of that particular protein in my body, this strand is transcribed. Okay. So this strand is only complementary to this strand. It doesn't mean that this should also code for insulin. Okay. So see, if you see T, C, G, T, so this is only complementary to this. This might code for some other protein. That is nothing but your, say, glucagon. This is just an example. This codes for your insulin and this codes for your glucagon. Okay. Now I want insulin to be produced in my body. Okay, I don't want glucagon. I want only insulin to be produced in a body. So what happens now first is, okay, I'll have a sequence called as promoter sequence, and at the end of the process I'll have a terminator sequence. So I'll have promoter sequence and terminator sequence. What is this promoter sequence is? Promoter sequence, only if I have this sequence, the DNA production, I mean the RNA formation will happen. Only if I have this sequence, the process will stop. So I will have promoter sequence and a terminator sequence. So what happens here is, only when the promoter is there, okay, only when the promoter is there, my enzymes will come and bind to the promoter. So my promoter will say, hi, we have a situation here, you have to come and help me in production. So that signal is given by the promoter. Okay. Now what I have to synthesize from this DNA, I have to produce a mRNA, correct? So I have to produce what? mRNA. So what polymerase do you think I need? For production of DNA, I need DNA polymerase. Now I am producing RNA. So what polymerase I need is RNA polymerase. So RNA polymerase will come and bind to the 3' end of the promoter. And reading this strand, the RNA is synthesized according to this complementary DNA. For example, I have A here. So what I'll get here is T, normally T, but this is RNA, so I'll have U, G, C, C, G, A, U again, C, G, 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 C, T, A, U, G. So this will be the sequence of my mRNA produced. So from this 3' to 5' end of the DNA, the RNA which I get will be like this. So if you see this RNA, that is U, C, G, U, G, G, C, A, U, G. This is the RNA. And the orientation of the RNA will be, this is 3' to 5'. So RNA will be, this is RNA. Okay, I'm just drawing it like this. 5' to 3'. Okay. So if you see this mRNA, this will be similar to this. This will be similar to this because this is also a complementary strand of 3' to 5'. I repeat, this, both the mRNA and this complementary strands are complementary to this template strand. Okay. So these two strands, that is the mRNA and the other strand here, will be similar except for the fact that in the place of thymine, uracil will come. Because this being RNA, I'll have only uracil. So instead of thymine, I'll have uracil, but otherwise the sequence will be the same. So this is my template strand. Okay, from this only the RNA is produced. This strand which is not doing anything, but still it is called as coding strand. Why do I call it coding strand? Because this strand is similar to the RNA produced. Clear? The strand which is producing the RNA is called as template strand. The strand to which the RNA is similar is called as coding strand. Clear? So template strand will be from 3' to 5'. Coding strand will be from 5' to 3'. And the orientation of the RNA will be 5' to 3'. Okay. Now what happens here is, okay, the RNA is produced, everything is fine. Imagine I want glucagon gene now. The requirement in my body is glucagon, not insulin. Now what happens is that, see, I told you the promoter region should be near the 3' end, then only polymerase will come. So this is my glucagon gene, correct? But I have only terminator here. So what happens is, if there is a requirement for the production of glucagon gene, the promoter and terminator regions will flank, will interchange. Okay, so the promoter and terminator genes will flank each other. So now what happens? This becomes your promoter and this becomes your terminator. This is promoter and this is terminator. Now if you see near 3' end you have the promoter, correct? So here my RNA polymerase will come and bind and it will read this gene and accordingly the RNA is produced. Clear? So this is how it works. So whichever strand has to be transcribed, accordingly there will be flanking and then that particular mRNAs are produced. So this is how that particular genes are transcribed. Okay. Now here is my mRNA which I got from the template strand. Clear? Okay. Now what happens next to this mRNA is that, okay, so normally in prokaryotes, okay, in prokaryotes, it is the DNA is like very simple. Okay, so what happens? I don't need, they don't have to undergo all this complex processes. But for eukaryotes, the length of the DNA is huge. In that, only 5%, 5 to 8% is only coding. Remaining are all non-coding regions. Okay, so full junk. So what happens is, in eukaryotes, okay, this mRNA will come out. Okay, see, I'll explain it here, diagrammatic way. If you see, this is a cell, this is a nucleus, nucleopores. Okay, DNA is inside, correct? So this process of transcription, that is DNA to mRNA, happens inside the nucleus, the nucleus. After this, the mRNA comes out here through the nucleopore, and here only translation will happen. Okay, so transcription happens inside the nucleus, translation happens outside in eukaryotes. In prokaryotes, both transcription and translation happens only in the cytoplasm. Clear? Okay, now I got my mRNA. So now I cannot call this a mRNA because this has to undergo certain steps called as post transcriptional changes. So my mRNA has to undergo some other extra changes to become a complete mRNA. Now I will not call this as mRNA, I will call this as hnRNA. So this is nothing but hnRNA, heterogeneous nuclear RNA. This hnRNA has to undergo post-transcriptional changes. Post is after transcriptional changes to become a mature mRNA. Now let's see what are those post-transcriptional changes. Okay. So if you see the post-transcriptional changes, so I told you this will happen only in eukaryotes because in prokaryotes there is no requirement of all these processes. Okay. Both transcription, when transcription happens itself, the translation will also parallelly start. Okay. So now, what are these post-transcriptional changes? You have three main steps. One is capping, second is tailing, and then splicing. So capping, tailing, and splicing are the three steps in the post-transcriptional changes. Okay. Now this is the mRNA which I got. Correct? So you all know that mRNA is least stable. It is not as stable as my DNA. So comparatively it is very less stable. Correct? So what happens is, so the orientation of mRNA is 5' to 3'. Correct? And capping. Okay. So methyl cap, methyl guanosine cap is attached at the pi dash. Why? Because just to ensure that the stability, because it is, if you leave that as such, the stability is lost. So just to make sure it is more stable, match the cap at the 5' end, and near the 3' end there is a poly A tail, polyadenylate tail. Okay, so this will ensure the stability of the RNA. Now come to your splicing. So what happens is, as I told you before, the human, that is eukaryotic DNA, will have more number of non-coding sequences which are not required. Okay, so this mRNA doesn't know which is coding, which is non-coding. It will just copy whatever is there in the DNA. So I am dividing this into exons and introns. Exons, introns, exons, introns. So the coding sequences, the ones which are required, are called as exons, and the non-coding sequences which are not required, which is to be removed, is called as introns. So this process of splicing involves removal of non-coding sequences and joining of exons. So intron splicing, it's called as intron splicing. Okay, so the introns are all removed and exons are all joined together. So that process is only called as splicing. Now after this, this is your methyl cap. What I have in my RNA is only exons. There are no introns. And I have a poly A tail. So this structure, after undergoing the post-transcriptional changes, that is nothing but the capping, tailing, and splicing, is called as your matured or processed RNA. Till then, it is not a RNA. I mean, it is not a matured RNA. It is called as hnRNA. Now, after undergoing this post-transcriptional changes, you call it as matured mRNA. Now, this mRNA leaves your nucleus and comes out to the cytoplasm to undergo the process of translation. Okay, fine. Now, what is the other thing which I want to tell you is, here if you see in this transcription process, okay, so there is, the first step is initiation, then elongation, then termination. Okay, the RNA itself is managing all the three steps. That is initiation, there's nothing else to support like that. Okay, no, because see, if there are some factors which will influence, so I will divide the entire transcription into three steps: initiation, elongation, and termination. Termination is stopping. Okay, Fine. And the transcription unit will have for initiation I have promoter. For elongation, I have my gene, structural gene. And for termination, I have my terminate. Okay. Apart from this, I have certain factors which will influence this. For example, I have something called as initiation factor. That is nothing but sigma. Termination factor, that is nothing but rho. Okay. So if you see my RNA polymerase with sigma factor, okay, it means initiation is happening. If you see my RNA polymerase with structural gene, it means elongation is happening. If you see my RNA polymerase with rho factor, it means termination is happening. So sigma is the initiation factor and rho is the termination factor. So if you see the RNA polymerase associated with sigma and rho, it means initiation and termination are happening accordingly. Topics like structure of your DNA, packaging of DNA, then we started with transcription. Okay, so we've seen about DNA replication. What is a template strand? What are the enzymes involved? The enzymes like ORI, helicase, topoisomerase, primers, polymerases, all these are the enzymes involved in DNA replication. Followed by that, we've seen about transcription. Okay, in transcription, what is a template strand? What is a coding strand? So they might ask you questions like, they might give you a template strand and they might ask you to write the complementary mRNA with the orientation. So always remember, the orientation of the mRNA will be from 5' to 3' and the template strand will be from 3' to 5'. Okay. So as I told you before, this entire process, see, I will differentiate as prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Okay. So basically prokaryotes, they do not have a proper nucleus. They have something called as nucleoid. And they have no nuclear envelope or nuclear membrane is absent. So here it is properly called as nucleus and nuclear envelope is present. Okay. So next important difference is that in prokaryotes, both transcription, which we have seen yesterday, and translation, which we are going to see today, happens in cytoplasm. Because they don't have a proper nucleus, so both the processes will happen only in the cytoplasm. But here, transcription happens in nucleus, inside the nucleus, and translation happens in cytoplasm. So this is a difference, main difference. Here both the processes are happening in the cytoplasm. Here transcription inside the nucleus and translation outside the nucleus. Then prokaryotes are polycistronic. What is meant by polycistronic? I'll explain you now. And we, the eukaryotes, are monocistronic. So what is this polycistronic and what is this monocistronic? A cistron is a coding unit of a gene. Okay. So what happens normally, if this is my DNA, okay, so say for example, this is my gene. Okay, this is a gene A. So you know what is a gene? A gene is nothing but the sequence in a DNA. Okay, so this is a gene A. Now, this gene will code for only one protein. So if I say this is a gene will code only for one protein, say insulin or glucagon. Okay, but so this kind of situation we call it as monocistronic. One gene, one protein. Okay, so I would say one gene, one protein. So that is monocistronic. So we are all monocistronic. Okay, so if we have a gene, that gene will code only for that particular protein. No other extra proteins will come in. But if it is polycistronic, one gene, many proteins. So the same gene will code for more than one proteins. Why? Because for prokaryotes, see for eukaryotes we have a lengthy DNA. Okay, so we can allot one gene for one protein. But this prokaryotes, the length of the DNA itself is very small. In that situation, they cannot afford like one gene for one protein. So their genes will be polycistronic. One gene will code for multiple proteins. So eukaryotes are polycistronic and eukaryotes are monocistronic. Okay. Now, let's see about the process of translation. Okay, so we've seen till transcription, we've seen post-transcriptional modifications, that is nothing but the capping, tailing and splicing, intron splicing. Okay, so only after these processes I'll call that as mRNA, and before that I'll call it as hnRNA, that is nothing but the heterogeneous nuclear RNA. Okay, now translation. Okay, so what happens is, this is your cell, this is the nucleus, and this is my DNA. So my mRNA is synthesized here. So the synthesized mRNA will leave the nucleus through the nuclear pore and it will come to the cytoplasm, in which the process of translation starts. Okay, so now my mRNA has come out. It has got a nice head, that is methyl guanosine head at 5'N, and it has got a poly A tail at 3'N. This here we have seen yesterday, correct? So, and it has got only the exons. Okay. Now, to write the code, say for example, CUA, CU, AUG, CGA. These are all your nitrogenous bases. Okay. So this is how my mRNA is. Okay. So after the splicing, whatever bases I have is this. Okay. Now here I have to read the codes in three letters. So that is called codon. Okay, a codon is a code. Okay, so I have to read it in three letters. So we'll see about codons and stuffs later. But generally now, as of now, codon is a three-lettered nitrogenous base. Okay, now, so I will call this three-lettered nitrogenous bases as genetic codes. Okay, so if you see generally, DNA is a polynucleotide, RNA is different, protein is different. Okay, so how are these communications happening between different groups is that they have a common language, which is nothing but the genetic code. So this genetic code is written by the DNA, copied by mRNA, and it is understood for the formation of protein synthesis or the amino acid chain. So that is why the genetic code plays a very important role. Okay, so totally there are 4 nitrogenous bases, correct? So how many codes you will have is, each code will have 3 letters, correct? So what happens is 2 into 5 into 2. Okay, so what happens here is, normally by the permutation and combinations, the calculations, okay, what happens is a code has got normally 3 letters. Okay, so now if I draw a box like this, there are totally 4 codes, A, U, G, C. I not use T here because this is RNA. So for example, A, U, G, C. Okay, and again here A, U, G, C. Okay, and here I'll write separately A, U, G, C. See, I'm just showing you an example. In this box, everything will be AA. Okay, there will be 4 AAs here. Here it will be UA. So there will be 4 UAs. Okay, so the last letter will only change here. AA, AAU, AAG, AAC. Likewise, UAA, UAU, UAG, UAC. So likewise, each box will have 4 codes. So overall, I will get totally 64 codes. Okay, so I will totally have 64 codes by the combinations and permutations. Okay, so that this was given by a scientist called as Khorana. Okay, so he gave this formula. He was breaking his head. Okay, there are 4 nitrogenous bases, these many codes, these many amino acids. So how many combinations I have to take? All these he figured out, and then he came to the conclusion that there are totally 64 codes. Okay, so what happens here is, the formula is 4 power 3. There are totally 4 codes and there are totally 3 letters in each code. So 4 into 4 into 4. That is nothing but 64. Okay. So earlier there were many wrong predictions. There were 2 codes. The formula which I wrote before is the some other scientists gave some wrong predictions. Okay. But it was not accounting. At last, this is the finalized version. That is a 4-par-3. So totally I will have 64 codes. Fine. Now to see about the properties of the genetic code. So as we are seeing about the genetic code now, so I told you there are totally 64 codes, correct? So how many amino acids we have is totally 20 amino acids. So there are totally 20 amino acids and the number of codes are 64 codes. So in these 64 codes, okay, the one code, okay, there's one code which does dual function. So it has got dual function. So normally the function of the codes is to code for an amino acid. For example, if I have AAA, it will have that particular amino acid. If I have AUG, methionine. So accordingly, each code will have one particular amino acid. So normally every code will have one amino acid coding, but there is one code which has got dual function. That is nothing but AUG. Okay, so you have to remember AUG. Why? Because this AUG codes for an amino acid called methionine. So the name of the amino acid is methionine. So this is normal function. Apart from that, this AUG is a start codon. So what do I mean by start codon is only if I have AUG, the process of translation starts. See, if you can see in this mRNA, okay, I have the codes are starting from here. CUA, ACU, etc. But though I have these many codes, my process will start only from the start codon. Okay, so before start codon, how many ever codes are there, I will not consider and the process will not start. Only from the start codon, how many ever codes are coming up, my process of translation will start. So this has a dual function. It codes for methionine and it acts as a start codon. Okay. 3 codons, that is UAA, UAG and UGA. These 3 will not code. They will not code for any amino acid. So in the 64 total, these 3 will not code for any amino acid and they act as a stop codon. AUG is a start codon, UAA, UAG and UGA is a stop codon. Okay, if you see totally, though there are 64 codes, the number of codes for the amino acid is only 64 minus 3 because these 3 won't code for any amino acid. So totally only 61 codes are there for the amino acids. Okay. So then one more thing which I have to tell you is one codon will code for only one amino acid. One codon will code for only one amino acid. Okay, and one amino will have more than one code. See, this will be a little confusing. Okay, so one codon, if I say one codon, AAU will code only for that particular amino acid. For example, AUG will code only for methionine. So that is what I meant by one codon codes for one amino acid. But one amino acid, that is methionine, can have more than one codons. So methionine can be AUG, can be methionine, UAC can be methionine. So for one amino acid, I can have one codons, but one codon will have only one amino acid. This property is called as unambiguous nature. And this is called degeneracy. See, based on this, there were a lot of questions. One amino acid can have more than one codons. So that is called degeneracy, and one codon will have only one amino acid. This is called as unambiguous nature of the genetic. And the codon with dual function is AUG, and the stop codons are UAA, UAG, and UGA. This genetic code is universal. Universal in the sense right from bacteria till the mammals, till human beings. If you see AUG, it is only methionine. Okay, so it will not vary from species to species. This codes are universal. Okay, so this is all about your genetic code. So let me just quickly recap it. One codon will have dual function, that is nothing but totally there are 64 codes and 20 amino acids. So there's one codon which is having the dual function, that is nothing but the AUG. It codes for methionine and also acts as a start codon. There are 3 stop codons which will not code for anything. So normally one codon will code for only one amino acid. If I say UAG, it's only for methionine. UAG is not for methionine and tyrosine, no. Okay, UAG is only for one. So that is what I meant by unambiguous nature. But one amino acid, see there are totally 20 amino acids, but there are 64 codes. Okay, 64 minus 3, 61 codes. So one amino acid can have more than one codon. So that is what is called degeneracy. The last one is my genetic code is universal. So right from bacteria to mammals, whatever code I have is only the same. The codes will not vary from species to species. Okay. So with this note, okay, with this idea, we are going to see about the process of translation. Okay. So if you can remember the transcription process, okay, I was telling you about the template strand, coding strand. So based on that, they might ask you some one words. Okay, they might give you a template strand and they might ask you to write the coding mRNA. Okay, so if they give you a template strand and if they ask you to write the coding mRNA, you have to write it in a complementary way. Okay, but if they give you a coding strand and ask you for the mRNA, just write the same strand but replace thymine by uracil. So that is the only difference. So they might, if you can look at your NCERT books, at the end of the chapter, you have some questions based on this with some sequences. Okay, so you can just have a look at it. So I'll just give you an example after finishing the translation so that you can, you'll understand it better. Okay, so now to start with the process of translation. Okay, so, okay, you know what is genetic code and everything. Now, the mRNA has come out. Okay, as soon as the mRNA has come out, the first step is smaller ribosomal unit. So, you know ribosome is a site of protein synthesis. So, as soon as the mRNA comes out, the smaller ribosomal unit will bind to the mRNA. Later, the larger ribosomal unit will come and bind to the mRNA. Okay, so then they will slide and they will go and search for the start codon. So they will slide here, they'll come over here. Okay, so what happens is they will scan for the start codon. So as soon as the start codon is there, what happens is one more RNA called as tRNA or transfer RNA. Okay, so transfer RNA will come and read the code. Okay, the code is AUG, fine. I have to go and get the amino acid accordingly. So this tRNA will go to the amino acid pool and they will pick up the amino acid according to this code. So if I have AUG, what amino acid I'll have is methionine, correct? So this picks up methionine. Okay, so this, then what happens? Next comes CGA. So accordingly, some other amino acid. So that comes, okay, for example, tyrosine. Okay, so as soon as this comes, okay, this will leave the site. This tRNA will leave the site. So again, so if it is leaving, I'm just erasing like this because I cannot instantly erase in this board. So I'm just, okay, so this is left. Now again for this code, one more tRNA will come and add on the amino acid. And this will go out. So accordingly, once one tRNA comes at the site, the first former one leaves. But the chain will be formed like this. It goes on like this. So this is the chain of amino acids. Okay. Now, to start with, the tRNA carrying the amino acid is called as charged tRNA. Charged tRNA. So if I say charged tRNA, it means it is carrying the amino acid. So charged tRNA brings the amino acid, leaves the amino acid for the synthesis of protein and then leaves uncharged. Okay. Now, there are three important sites here in the process of protein synthesis. Okay. The first and foremost site is, the order is EPA. Okay. So, first of all, there is a peptide bond formation between the amino acid, you know, right? So, the bonds between the amino acid is nothing but the peptide bond. Okay, so first of all, this site to which the new amino acid is bought. Okay, so this is here. So the new amino acid is bought. So the site wherein new amino acid is coming is called as amino acid site. Okay, and the site where so new amino acid is coming here and peptide bond formation is happening in front. So the site where the peptide bond formation is happening is the P site. And the site from which the old tRNA, uncharged tRNA leaves out, that is called as E site or elimination site. I repeat, A is amino acid acceptance site, P is peptide bond formation site, and E is elimination site. So the order would be E, elimination happens in this end, peptide bond and new amino acid comes here. So it is E, P and A. Okay, so fine. So if you can see here, mRNA is involved, tRNA is involved and rRNA. Okay, so in protein synthesis, mRNA, tRNA and rRNA. All three RNAs are involved. Okay, mRNA carries the codes. tRNA brings your amino acid and rRNA helps in peptide bond formation. rRNA plays an important role in peptide bond formation. So all three RNAs, tRNA is also called as adapter molecule because if without tRNA, there is no RNA which can read the code and accordingly bring the amino acid. Okay. If you can see the tRNA, there are 4 arms. Okay. This is anticodon arm. This is a codon. So something which reads the code is your anticodon. So this is your anticodon arm. Opposite to this anticodon arm, there is a amino acid acceptor arm. There is something called, so this site accepts your amino acids. And this is your anticodon. So these two will be straight opposite to each other. So that can read the code and set the amino acid. Read the code, set the amino acid. So these are all joined together by the peptide bond formation. So this is how, so at the end of the thing, if you have UGA, yeah, this is your stop codon, correct? So once you find the stop codon, the process that is 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are only 4 amino acids. Okay. So when the stop codon is there, one more protein will come and bind here and the chain gets dissociated. As I told you, stop codon will not account for any amino acid. So there is no amino acid here and the process will blindly stop. So this is how the protein formation. So this formed chain of amino acids are further processed in the endoplasmic reticulum or Golgi apparatus. They're packed properly. The 3D structures are made proper and then they are released in the form of small vesicles. Okay. Now, if you can see here, there are codes before your start codon and after your stop codon, correct? But still, the amino acid which is coming out is only between start and stop. Before start, it's of no use. After stop, it's of no use, correct? Only between start and stop, the process is happening. So these regions, before and after start and stop, are not translated. So they are called as UTRs, that is untranslated regions. So before stop and before start and after stop, the regions are not translated, so they are called as untranslated regions. So this is all about the translation process. So we were seeing about transcription and translation. So in that we've seen how the protein is formed from the mRNA. Okay. So what happens is, so the main point which I forgot to tell you is, there are 3 types of RNAs, mRNA, tRNA and rRNA, right? So all 3 RNAs are involved in protein synthesis, okay. But if you see, if you can recall, from the DNA, I said only mRNA is formed, correct? So how are the other 2 RNAs formed? From where are they formed? Okay, so are they formed from some other source or how are they formed? These all 3 RNAs are formed from the DNA only, okay. So it depends upon the RNA polymerase. If you can recall, there is a promoter sequence there. RNA polymerase is attracted towards a promoter sequence. So depending upon the RNA polymerase, accordingly I will get that particular type of RNA. So if it is, okay, the order is R, M and T. Okay. So for getting mRNA, I need RNA polymerase 2. For getting uh, tRNA, I need RNA polymerase 3. For getting rRNA, I need RNA polymerase 1. So the order is RMT. RMT. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So that part, this might come in some one word. So I just thought of telling you. Left it there. So I just sort of, you know, brushing up again. Okay. Now we are going to see about the new concept called gene regulation. Okay, what is gene regulation? What is the regulation? So you know what is a regulator. In fan, to control the speed, we use a regulator. If you want to speed up, we'll put it in high mode. If you want to slow down, so that is something. Regulator is something which controls the speed of the reaction or the amount of the reaction. Okay. Now gene regulation. In our body, no, all genes are not produced all the time. Okay, 24 by 7 there will not be a production of the genes, or 24 by 7 there will not be a shutdown. Only when there is a requirement, the genes are transcribed and translated. When there is no requirement, the genes are turned off. When there is a requirement, they are turned on. Okay, any gene. Okay, so in our body, everything is like working under this control only. So there are two types of regulations. One is positive regulation and the other one is negative regulation. In positive regulation, increase in some factor will increase the production of the gene. Okay, so that is directly proportional. So this is positive regulation. In negative regulation, increase in one factor will decrease the rate of transcription or translation. So this is negative regulation. Okay, and positive is directly proportional and negative is inversely proportional. So this is the main difference. Okay. Now this gene regulation was first discovered in prokaryotes. This was first discovered in prokaryotes, that is in bacteria, by a scientist called Jacob and Monod. So these scientists discovered the gene regulatory mechanism in bacteria for the first time. Now we are going to see in detail about that particular regulation. Okay. So I'm just going to draw the structure first and then I'll explain you step by step. P stands for promoter. O stands for operator. Z, Y, A. So this is your structural gene. And this will be your regulator gene. Okay. So this is, see, you might wonder what are these PI? All these are sequences only. Imagine a DNA. Okay. So I'm just giving ATGC is a promoter, GAUCD is an inducer. So I'm just splitting that DNA into the regions. Okay, that regions are promoter, inducer, promoter, operator, ZYA. Okay. Now what is the situation here is, see, normally a bacterium, okay, will feed on glucose, will have its metabolism, will go on for the regulatory process and all by using the glucose. Okay. When there is a lack of glucose in the medium, when there is a scarcity of glucose, my bacterium can adapt itself to digest lactose. Okay, when there is no glucose, I can go a little further and take in a complex molecule and I can digest that. Okay, now we are going to see about that mechanism only, that is mainly about the lactose metabolism. So that is why this is called as lac-operon. Lac stands for lactose, operon is the control, okay, the regulatory control over the genes. Okay, now let me explain about each thing clearly. Promoter. So how many terms you're seeing, just note down. Promoter is the first one. So what is a promoter? We've seen about the promoter in the earlier topics also. Promoter is a sequence which attracts the polymerase. So for example, this is my DNA. From this, the RNA should be produced. So what a polymerase it will attract? This will attract the RNA polymerase. Clear? So promoter sequences are required for attracting or for pulling in the polymerases. So promoter. Next is your operator. Operator plays a very important role to check if the mechanism is switched on or switched off. So I can say based on this only if the mechanism is on or off. Okay. So operator is a sequence which plays a crucial role in switching on and off. Z, Y, A, they are nothing but the structural genes. Okay. And I stands for I gene. Okay. It's a repressor. Okay. Repressor or okay, I gene is a repressor. Okay. So why do I call this I gene as repressor? Because what normally happens when glucose is available. Okay. See, these genes are the genes required for lactose metabolism. Okay. So structural genes here ZYA are the genes required for lactose metabolism. So when I have glucose, I don't have the requirement of these three genes, correct? Only when the glucose is not available, these three should have the role. But when I have glucose, there is no point in that being turned on. So what happens is, normally when glucose is available for the bacteria to proceed or to live on, what happens is, this I gene, you know, DNA produces an mRNA. And this produces a protein. Transcription, translation. DNA to mRNA, mRNA to protein. Okay. So this gene produces an mRNA and this mRNA produces a protein. These proteins are called as repressor proteins. Okay. So what happens is, this repressors will go and bind to the operator. These repressors produced from your I gene will go and bind to the operator. So now what happens is, my polymerase will come here, okay, and it will slide a search for transcribing the gene. But the way is blocked. It can go only till here. After this, it cannot proceed because my operator is blocked. Okay, so the process stops here and the genes are not transcribed. Clear? So I repeat again. Normally, when the glucose is available, there is no need of these genes to be turned on. So what happens is, the I gene produces a repressor and this repressor proteins will go and block the operator region. So when the operator region is blocked, my RNA polymerase will slide for the process of transcription, producing mRNA transcript, and it gets stopped here. So the genes are not transcribed and it is switched off. So when I have glucose, the lactose genes are not required, so they are technically switched off. Okay, so this is a switch off mechanism. Fine. Now what happens when the lactose is available? Okay, so what happens to my genes when the lactose is available is what we're going to see now. Okay, let's have so you have to remember, when the operator is blocked, I told you operator plays a very important role, right? So when the operator is blocked, it is switched off. Okay. Now let's see what happens. How is this switched on? Same promoter, I, promoter, operator, Z, Y, A. Okay. Now what happens? When there is no glucose, when the lactose is there in the medium, then these genes should be turned on. This is switched off because the operator is blocked from your I gene. Okay. Now, same, my I genes will produce an mRNA and this will produce a repressor proteins as usual. But when the lactose is available, okay, so probably I'll use I'll use the other shape for lactose, something like hexagon. Okay, so now lactose is available in the medium, so I'll have little amount of lactose taken in. Okay, these lactose molecules will go and bind with the repressor. So lactose molecules binds with the repressor. So when lactose and repressor gets binded, the operator region is free. So now what happens? The polymerase will come in and it will happily transcribe my structural genes. That is nothing but Z, Y and A. Clear? So I'll repeat again. The lactose molecules, see, a repressor is something which is blocking this. So my lactose is blocking this repressor itself, so this is free. Clear? So that is what is happening when lactose is available. So that is why I will call lactose molecules as inducer. Lactose will induce the reaction. So lactose is a inducer. Repressor is your I gene. Clear? So lactose is a inducer, I gene is a repressor, and these three are the structural genes. Okay. Now, this gene, there are 3 genes totally. So 3 genes will produce 3 different enzymes. The enzymes are, Z gene will produce the enzyme called as beta. You have to memorize these names. Beta galactosidase. Beta galactosidase. Then Y genes will produce an enzyme called permease. And A genes will produce an enzyme called trans-acetylase. So the enzymes are beta galactosidase, permease and trans-acetylase. These 3 are involved in lactose metabolism. These 3 enzymes are involved in lactose metabolism. So only when the lactose is available, these 3 genes are transcribed. When the lactose is not there, operator is blocked and it is switched off. When lactose is available, the operator is free because repressor is blocked by the lactose molecules and transcription happens. So Z gene will produce the enzyme called beta galactosidase, Y will produce permease, and A will produce trans-acetylase. So what is the function of this beta galactosidase? This breaks the lactose into glucose plus galactose. So this is done by beta galactosidase. So this enzyme breaks my lactose because I'm taking in lactose, but I want glucose. So take in lactose. Lactose is broken down by beta galactosidase. Permease will increase the permeability of lactose, so it will take more lactose inside your cell. And transferase will act as a catalyst in speeding up the reaction. So this is all about the gene regulation. I'll explain it again. All together, they are called as operon. So overall, they're controlling. These genes collectively control and they will regulate the switch on and switch off mechanisms. So promoter, one thing you have to remember, operator blocked, switch off. Operator free, switch on. Okay, I gene produces repressor. Lactose molecules, inducer. Okay, so this is how, this is just a small example how the genes are regulated in the body according to the requirement, according to the need of the time.